Sir, we will start the introduction and other things. By that time, I think others people will keep on joining.
Yes, please.
Okay. Yes, so good evening, all the seniors and friends. Secretary Mihir Seth, Secretary of the Society, Managing Committee Member Mandar Telam, and all my seniors. I welcome all of you to this lecture meeting on virtual platform on the recent important decisions in indirect tax. I welcome and thank today's speaker, Advocate CA and Advocate JK Mittal ji for accepting our invitation to speak on BCS virtual platform. This is a BCS Indirect Tax Committee initiative for which I thank Chairman Sunil Gabhawala and Convener Mandar Telam for their coordination with Advocate Mittal. BCS is a 72 years experienced organization. It is a voluntary body of chartered accountants known for its ethical governance and quality standards and new initiatives carried out with long-term objectives. This year, BCS theme is tradition, transition, and transformation. All our traditional courses and events were conducted with the help of technology, and digital transformation helped us to remain relevant. Not only relevant, rather this year we could achieve higher scale and reach for our digital for our courses with participation from different cities and towns because it was virtual. It was a real value unlocking for BCS events and its superior contents. I'm sure you must have enrolled for our 15th GST RSC, a refresher virtual residential study course, which is from 3rd June to 6th June 2021, and the enrollment is in progress. In case you have missed, please do the same as soon as possible. Coming to today's subject, this is the beginning of new financial year. We are just beginning in April 2021, and we felt we should update the members on the recent important decisions in indirect tax in the last 1 year or so. Few weeks back, we had a similar kind of meeting by Chartered Accountant and Advocate Sunil M. Lala, who covered international tax decisions. And in the next week, on Wednesday, 14th of April, we have CA and Advocate Mr. Hero Rai on direct tax decisions. And today is indirect tax decision. So we are covering the whole territory of the taxation vis-a-vis important decisions in last year or so. And when we thought of indirect tax decisions, we could think of one name, that is CA Advocate and Advocate JK Mittal. He was our first choice, and Mr. Mittal was kind enough to accept our invitation immediately. So thank you very much for the same, sir. And with this small introduction and my brief remarks, I welcome all of you once again and wish you an enriching experience with Mr. Mittal. And I will request Secretary Mihir to introduce Mr. Mittal formally.
Thank you, Suhas. Mr. J.K. Mittal, honor to have you. Welcome. Mr. J.K. Mittal is a chartered accountant turned advocate. He's a chartered accountant, company secretary, and LLB. He's a law graduate from Delhi University and a practicing advocate, particularly in indirect taxes in High Court and Supreme Court. He's a co-chairman of the National Council on Indirect Taxes of ASSOCHAM. The Supreme Court Bar Association has honored Mr. Mittal for 9 consecutive years, right from 2006 to 2014, and also in year 2016 to 2018 on the occasion of Law Day for Constitution Day. What a feat indeed. Mr. Mittal is the author of several books: Law, Practice and Procedure of Service Tax, Introduction to GST, Handbook on Equalization Levy, Handbook of GST Law. Mr. Mittal, thank you once again for kindly consenting to be the guest speaker today. And I'm quite sure it is going to be a very enriching experience, as the President said, to all the participants. The stage is all yours. Over to you, Mr. Mittal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, entire team of Chartered Accountant, Bombay Chartered Accountant Society, for giving me this opportunity. I'm refraining from taking individual names, and kindly accept my, thanks to all one, President, Secretary, and all office period. And my friends, those who are listening to this webinar through online, I will try my best to give you the input in a different shape. I got the entire list of judgment on which we have to speak, and which is whatever the time we have within our hand. We will discuss all these judgments in a manner in which all the participant can understand what was, in these cases, and what exactly we should understand and how benefit we can take up. If any of the judgment which I have the contrary view, we will try to reconcile that also, so that our entire discussion become very interesting. Let's begin with the very first case which I've been asked to speak about, the state of West Bengal versus Calcutta Club case. Incidentally, I was also associated with this case representing the SOCHM, because these were the group of appeals were decided by the Honorable Supreme Court. Essence of this case was, whether the concept of mutuality still survived after the amendment made in the Constitution, bringing the clause 29A under Article 366. In fact, to my mind, that case which was related to the service tax as well as the VAT, and decided in favor of the assessee only. Particularly in service tax, it was held that till 30th June 2017, no service tax would be applicable. But there was other reason also, because of the definition clause given, clause 25 AA and A of the Finance Act 1994, which was, there was a specific exclusion. Even after the negative list was introduced, explanation was considered by the Supreme Court. Now the different question arises as of now, because we have moved forward and the GST has come into force. And in fact, since the GST, after this judgment, many people raise a query whether it will apply to the GST or not. In fact, let me, appraise you. I am also representing the Institute of Chartered Accountant in some of the cases which have been taken up in the High Court of Delhi as well as the Advanced Ruling Authority, whether our membership would be, fees would be applicable, subject to the GST or not. We have opined that it will not be subject to GST, but still Institute is charging GST, that is apart. Now, if we have seen the provision which was introduced in this budget, and probably it was understood that to overcome this judgment, the amendment has been made in the section 7 by introducing the clause AA, and by stating that despite anything said in the court, and they would like to apply that any member, just to read the one line only of this amendment, that which is stated in this amendment: the activity or the transaction by a person other than an individual to its member or constituent or vice versa for cash, deferred payment or other valuable consideration for the purpose of this class, hereby clarified that notwithstanding anything contained in any other law for the time in force, or any judgment, decree, order, or any tribunal authority, the person or its member or constituent shall be deemed to be the two separate persons, and the supply of activity or transaction inter se shall be deemed to take place from one such person to another. Therefore, it appears that what the government want to convey through this amendment, and with this amendment has a retrospective effect from 1st July 2017, they want to treat member and the organization is two different person, and all activity between them will be taxable. The question arises whether, despite this judgment, whether this judgment can be overcome, or whether the base for which was analyzed by the judgment has been changed or not. You please see this judgment which I have noted down. One important paragraph of this judgment, the Supreme Court said the doctrine of mutuality has not been done away with the subclause E, which is introduced in the Article 366(29)(a) of the Constitution of India. Therefore, my understanding of the law, which is well settled by the Supreme Court, a judgment when delivered by the any court, either High Court or a Supreme Court, the government or the Parliament cannot do away with that judgment. That means they cannot bring a amendment in the law contrary or conflicting to the judgments, but they can do the base, they can change, which was analyzed by the court. Therefore, if the Parliament would have amended the Constitution, Article 366(29)(a), then this amendment probably could have been valid. Since Article 366(29)(a) still valid, because despite the GST law was introduced, that clause has not been done away with. Therefore, so far as that clause is still there, that clause has been analyzed, and in that analysis, in this judgment, it was found by the Supreme Court that the mutuality of the concept still survive. Therefore, to my mind, this amendment, if would be challenged, it may be struck down by the court. That is the one aspect. Second observation, in para 45, the Supreme Court made in this judgment, which I have noted down in my note. Let me read it. The Supreme Court in para 46 and para 48 concluding, considering the para 45 observation, like under the Income Tax Act, by express provision, profit and gain of the mutual insurance company brought to tax, and by deeming fiction, conversion of a capital assets into stock in trade by an owner is brought to tax. Similar provision is required to bring to tax and to do away with doctrine of mutuality, which is absent in the language of Article 366(29)(a)(e). Therefore, the whatever amendment has been made, still it has just come into force. Probably the day will be notified after the Finance Act has enacted. We have to see first all the state legislators also to bring this kind of amendment in the GST law. Secondly, once it will be tested, then we will see it whether this amendment is valid or not. But as of now, the government intention is very clear. They want to tax all organization, whatever they are charging from their member. You please keep in mind, it is not only the Institute of Chartered Accountant or this is the organization will be taxed. All organization, not only the Chamber of Commerce. Probably once this question will be raised to the Bar Council of India or various Bar Association of India, somehow I foresee such kind of provision will be challenged if they will be asked to pay the tax, and we will have another round of litigation. Only unfortunate part in this country is that since independence, whatever law is laid down by the court, still we have the many round of litigation for which every taxpayer and consultant is worried when the law will be settled. Therefore, when the Supreme Court has settled this law, this amendment probably try to unsettle this law. For giving open a view, we should have another round of litigation. Therefore, if you have any question, you can interrupt me in between judgment by judgment, or we can go on and we can have the certain discussion on this part. But it will be interesting to see this judgment and this amendment, how it will be reconciled by the court in future once it will be challenged. The second judgment is very interesting, which has been just pronounced by the Supreme Court in the March 2021 only, that the Canon India Limited versus Commissioner of Custom. If I say in one line, the judgment appeared to be very simple. But if we go in the bottom of this judgment, it will have a bearing in the GST law as well as in the pending litigation of service tax and central excise as well. Let's discuss in both count. If in the simple word, what they said, the DRI officer is not the proper officers and they are not competent to issue the so-cause notice under the Custom Act. Therefore, whatever the so-cause notice have been issued by the DRI, all will be struck down. And it, in fact, after this judgment, I came across probably the Madras High Court has already quashed one of the so-cause notice. And I also come across one of the clarification issued by the board, by the Ministry of Finance, that henceforth with all the so-cause notice where the investigation has been done by the DRI shall be issued by the concerned officer of the custom. And in fact, the another things I would like to tell, we are arguing another case in the Calcutta High Court, and that is related to the GST, where the DRI started investigation and asking the the company, that the Olam Agro Private Limited, to pay GST by alleging that you have wrongfully taken the input tax credit benefit as per section 16 of the IGST law, and as well as you have taken the benefit of exemption on the authorization granted by the under the foreign trade policies. Our question was first only before the court that whether the DRI officer has any competency to initiate any kind of proceeding under the GST law, because the GST law, the proper officers has been designated, those who are the different set of officers, and DRI is not the proper officer at all. So therefore, and I have been told similar kind of litigation is going on throughout the country, and the DRI officers across the country are investigating the company under the GST law, asking them to refund the credit which they have taken. Therefore, to my mind, this judgment will help even under the present GST scenario also, because the DRI has not the proper officer even under the GST law also, if we read carefully. Now, if we see the several observations which has been made in this judgment, that is to my mind is quite relevant both in the GST and pending litigation in service tax as well as central excise as well. Why it is so? Just hear this, that we have the different set of officer, those who are initiating proceeding against the assessees. One was the service tax officers, and incidentally the notification which was issued for the service tax, that has already been done away with. The second set of officer what we have seen is the DGCI officers, which now after the introduction of the GST they call it as a DGGI or DGGSTI, the department. Now the question arises whether they are competent to initiate any kind of proceeding, whether they could be called as a proper officer or not. The observation in para 19 is very important of this judgment of the canon India. And what the Supreme Court observed, that the officers of the DRI was appointed by issuing a notification which the Supreme Court said was ill-founded, because that notification was issued under section 234 of the Custom Act. The Supreme Court observed this section does not confer any power on any authority to entrust any function to officers. This section is a part of the definition clause of the Act. It merely defines a proper officer. Therefore, because since I am handling large number of cases which are DGCI has initiated before GST and even after GST, number of proceeding, including against the advocates now also, those officers which are the DGCI officers, they said we are the officer competent to act under the Finance Act 1994. Now the question arises under which provision of the law they have been appointed. In fact, you see, they the notification under which they have been appointed is similar to the the 234 of the Custom Act. If we see, there are similar definition clause of the Central Excise Officer given under the Central Excise Act. Even if it is assumed that that section is applicable to the service tax, the question arises that section is only a definition clause, and if a definition clause it does not empower any officer to initiate any kind of proceeding, that merely a definition clause, and therefore this judgment will be very helpful. And if we want to win the case, sometime merit we may be having very loose case, but in the technicality which we call it as, sometime it goes because in a big way in favor of the assessee, because if we take the stand that it is without authorization and it is without jurisdiction, it is on the very basis of it is illegal, on this ground itself we can succeed. To my mind, and probably this can help to every other consultant also, DGCI officer, if we see the notification which was issued, probably it was the notification some 20 of 2014 and 24 of 2014 under the service tax, where the one hand we appointed the officer called as a commissioner service tax. Other hand, it was stated that the DGCI officer will be treated as the officer, central excise officer for all purpose. But we have to see the very beginning of that. They said it is appointed as per section 255 of the Finance Act 1994 and read with the section 2D of the Central Excise Act. Both are definition clause. Definition clause, in fact, 2D is a definition clause, and the 255 we see the definition clause, but it says if there any term which has not been defined in the Finance Act, which will be applicable as defined in the Central Excise Act. Therefore, if we see all these things, the question probably around in this judgment also, whether the definition clause can empower the GST officer or the DGCI officers to take power itself under the Finance Act 1994. To my mind, it cannot take. The second question also arises. If we see the Finance Act, there is no substantive provision which empowered it. If we see the GST law, the section 5 is there, which empowered, if section 3, 4, 5, 6, if we read all together, that is called the appointment of the officer, as well as empowering them to exercise their power under the GST law. Therefore, if there was no provision for empowering them in the definition clause of the Central Excise Act, which in any case was not applicable even to the Finance Act, this will be a great help if this argument is taken by us to challenge the proceeding initiated under the Finance Act 1994. Many people are facing such kind of proceeding. In fact, I have got even in 2021 number of cases where the so-called notice has been issued by the DGCI, etc., to initiate and demand service tax against many. In fact, some of the assessees have been searched by the Director General of GST by presuming that they have the power. Therefore, this is very interesting judgment. Now, the second part of this judgment is very interesting. That's why I told in the beginning, if we read this judgment in one line, it was very simple. Only the DRI has no competency to issue the so-called notice under the Custom Act. But the question is that if a judgment comes, if we can cull out from the judgment certain, the law laid down by the Supreme Court, which can be helpful to us under the GST law, excise law, or the service tax law, that would be more fruitful for our discussion. So therefore, the second point to my mind, which is very interesting, has been decided in this case, how the proceeding which has already been concluded can be reopened by the officers. The Supreme Court in para 12 has made very significant observation, and there are certain this para 12 said that we have not seen any fiscal law. It was not brought to our notice to reopen the assessment or recovery duty which has escape assessment has been conferred upon an officer other than the officer of the rank of the officer who initially took the decision. That is very important. How it is, please try to appreciate. If we practice under the indirect tax, we would have seen the 2-3 things. There are various wings. One is called this excise department, the audit wing. One is the preventive wing. One is the DGCI. One is the executive commissioner. All one by one take, the officers send them the notices and investigate them. And these officers take the different view for the same assessee for the same period. Like we are facing, many of such kind of litigation in the court. For example, one of the case, I'm narrating it, the officers from the audit department of the Central Excise, audit team came to the assessee. They conducted audit, verified the records, and asked the assessee to pay 2.8 crore rupees. And assessee, to avoid the litigation, he accepted, whatever the demand was raised by the officers and paid pi to pi. Now, after 2 years, the DGCI officer issued the summon to the same assessee for the same very period, saying that now we will investigate. We approached to the court, and in this particular assessee, the court asked the DGCI not to issue the so cause notice, and that interim order is still live and continuing. Whereas the other assessee came later on, where the so cause notice was already issued, where the audit was already conducted. On those cases also, interim order has been passed by the court not to take a final order, unless the court decided. Now, the question we should pose to ourselves, when any assessee, whether under the GST law or prior to that under the central excise or maybe custom or maybe the service tax, if the records have already been verified and duty has been determined, whatever way it was communicated to the assessee, whether the assessee accept it or whether assessee contest it, the another wing of the department, like the DGCI, here was the DRAI, can again investigate and take a different view and to reopen the assessment which has already been made. Kindly bear in mind, assessment does not mean, once the final order is made. If you read the definition, even a self-assessment, all are assessment. If the duty has been determined, if you see the full bench judgment of the Jindal Photo Limited of the Delhi High Court, long back under the Income Tax Act, it was held by the court. What is the assessment? Assessment means when an officer determined the duty payable by an assessee. It is not necessary to assessment to be made under section 142 of the Income Tax Act. The assessment under if we see the indirect tax law, it is a different kind of scheme altogether. Therefore, they come for an audit, they verify, and to protect the interest of the revenue, they try to make the assessment, and then perfectly valid if they have communicated this. And in that case, assessment is made, and officer communicate this to the assessee. Whether the assessee is accepted or not, that will not change the entire scenario. Therefore, this judgment, if we take into account para 12 and as well as para 13, then we will reach at the same conclusion. I would like to read the para 13 of this judgment, which is very, very useful, where the statute confer the same power to perform an act on different officer, as in this case, the two officer, especially when they belongs to different department, cannot exercise their power in the same case. Where one officer has exercised his power of assessment, the power to order reassessment must also be exercised by the same officer or his superior, and not by another officer of another department, though he is the designated to be an officer of the same rank. In our view, this would result into an anarchical and unruly operation of a statute, which is not contemplated by any canon of construction of the statute. Therefore, I am very happy with this judgment, because the similar view I was having for last more than a decade. Whenever the audit has been already conducted by the department, they cannot come around by the different department, DGCI or the preventive wing, and to say that now we will also investigate the same assessee for the same period, same very record under the same law. Therefore, we should ask a question, another question to ourselves. Once these officers are working, maybe a valid officers, don't go by that whether notification is valid or not for the time being of our discussion. They have to exercise their power under the Finance Act 1994 only, or the GST law. They cannot have the different power under the different law. Therefore, it is not a Jindal photo. I referred only in the context that what is the meaning of assessment. We are concentrating only on the Canon India. Canon India judgment, the two aspects I have discussed. One is that whether the reopening of the assessment can be possible by the different officer of the different department, like DGCI or DGGI, or by the preventive department, when the audit has been already conducted by the same assessee for the same period by the audit wing of the same department. This judgment, to my mind, will be applicable. Second aspects, I'm repeating it just in one line. When the appointment of these officers have been made in a definition clause, that whether valid or not, as per this judgment, the definition clause, if any notification is issued, that is ill-founded, that is not valid, because that does not empower the officers. That is merely a definition clause. Therefore, the power exercised by the DGCI in the past cases presently they are opening it even after the introduction of the GST. That can be challenged to my mind. Now we can proceed, further. The another beautiful judgment is the Nirmal Kumar Prashan by the Supreme Court in 2020 judgment in the January 2020. It was pronounced. This judgment is interesting and it may can help, to some extent, even under the GST law, somewhere it may be, though the principle laid down in this judgment, if we understand the fact of this case, where the goods were imported and after importation of the goods, it was kept in the bonded, warehouses. And after that, the sale took place. The question was that whether any exemption benefit under the central sales tax law we can get by saying that it was the sale in the course of import or export of the goods. The Supreme Court came to the conclusion that the benefit of exemption, which was granted under Section 5 of the Central Sales Tax Act, will not be applicable in this case. Why? The Supreme Court said that once the goods has come within the landmass of Indian territory, this particular provision of the Central Sales Tax Act will not be applicable, because the Section 5 is applicable when it is in the course of import or export such transaction take place. Then only this exemption will be applicable. If the goods has already landed in the land mass of India, then the provision will not apply. And if I can, read para 20, just one sentence, that will make it clear what exactly the Supreme Court held. For the sale or purchase to qualify as a sale or purchase in the course of import, the essential condition are that such sales shall occur before the goods has crossed the custom frontier of India, and the import of goods must be affected or import is occasioned due to such sale or purchase. In the present case, the sale in question did not occasion. Now we should keep in mind, after the introduction of the GST law, the applicability of the CGST Act or the VAT Act has been, very limited to the 5 products only. Therefore, essentially, this judgment is not would be applicable in most of the cases in the present scenario after the GST law. But we can take the certain clue. And in fact, if you can remember, even under the GST law, one question was raised when, sales takes place in the custom area at the airport, whether that will be subject to the GST or not. In fact, I can remember probably the one of the advanced ruling authority has given the judgment that it will be applicable, or maybe a circular was issued, and ultimately another authority decided that it will not be applicable. My mind, once GST law has the limited applicability. If we see the section 1 of the GST law, it applies to the entire, the extent to the entire territory of India. If the certain, the territory has not been treated as a territory of India, which is within the custom area, and essence of the entire thing was that not to levy the tax. Any sale and purchase takes place outside, the area where which they want to tax. Therefore, we can take the clue, various finding and various previous judgment like Asoka Hotel, etc., has been discussed in this judgment. Otherwise, the judgment was applicable only in the context when the CGST Act was full force applicable. Now, to my mind, it has a very limited applicability. Therefore, not required to be discussed much about this judgment. Next judgment is quite, useful, because Torrent Power Limited judgment, which was from the Gujarat High Court, was decided in December, 2018. But it has both the element. It decided both under the GST law as well as the service tax law. And essence of this judgment is useful to discuss if we understand what a circular was issued under the GST law. Because if we all know, so far as the transmission of electricity and distribution of electricity has been kept outside the GST law. But as we understand that if we go by the opinion of the officer, those who are implement the GST law or those who are in the policy maker, despite everything in the clear in the law, they try to find out something if they can tax, which essentially has not been taxed by the legislator why the Parliament framed the law. Therefore, the Circular 34, which was issued on 1st March 2018, clarified that even though distribution and transmission of the electricity is outside the GST law, but other charges will be subject to the GST. That is the application fees for releasing concession, connection for electricity, rental charges against the metering equipment, testing fee for metering, meter, transformer, capacitor, etc., labor charges for customer for shifting of meter, shifting of service line, charges for duplicate bills. If these are charges are charged by the DISCOM. This question was arises even under the service tax law. Very interesting and a detailed judgment has been delivered by the Honorable High Court of Gujarat. And if we go by the detailed finding, we will find that how the the conclusion was drawn by the High Court in this case. The High Court went by that if we essentially provide any activities or if we do any activities, we have to do certain incidental and auxiliary activity also. And this judgment, before I give the finding of this judgment, I want to just give with my own experience, couple of the things how the officer has gone wrong in the past. And if we understand the essence of this judgment and the kind of example I am going to give, probably we can solve many of the problem of our SSC. Because sometimes, with the greatest respect to my friends, chartered accountant friends, sometimes because we are not used to go to the court and we are highly influenced with the view expressed by the officers, because we chartered accountant used to go to the department and meet very frequently to the officers, and officers give his opinion, and we become the so much swayed by their opinion that we lose our track and we don't think independently. And as soon as we think in the line of the officers, we lose the track of as an officer or as a professionals. And as soon as we lose the our professionalism, we don't find our thinking in the line of the law. Therefore, my request would be you hear the couple of example carefully, and there your line of thinking will be entirely changed. I remember in 2003, the Chartered Accountant Northern India region invited me one of the conference, and a similar question was posed that time to all the 5-star hotels. Once a guests were staying in the hotels, they were staying in a room, and that particular point of time, there was no levy of service tax if the hotels rent out their room to their guests. But the officer thought if somehow we can tax some element of it, and they try to issue notices by saying that if a guest stay in a room, then you provide some facilities to them. And they interrogated the officers of these hotels. They said, what facilities you provide to the guest? They said, we provide a television set in a room, and that television set has a cable connection. If our guests want to watch the televisions, they can watch it any channel. And we also provide the free laundry, one set of their clothes in a day. We also provide the food basket, etc. They said that is enough, and we can take out something from it. And they said the cable services was taxed from 16 August 2002. Therefore, out of the 10,000 rupees, assumingly they charge for the room, some element you are charging for providing cable connection. Therefore, it will be subject to tax. Fortunately, after our discussion in one of the conference, the officer was sitting, and they did not proceed with the matter, and it was all notices closed down, because we said essentially guest has not come to the hotel for buying or to purchase the cable connection. He has come for the luxury, and there is already Northern Catron the case, etc., decided by the Supreme Court. You have to take the essential activity. You can't subdivide the activity in many parts, which is not concerned at all. Therefore, similar view if you take in this judgment also. Here, if we get an electricity connection, the many activity has to be done. If unless until from the main pole to our house, a cable is laid down, electricity connection will not be provided. Unless until meter is set up in our house, it will not be provided to us. Unless until they generate a bill and give to us, then we can't pay our electricity bill. And if we delay in, they will charge the penalty, etc., late fees charges, etc. Therefore, they have to test electricity meter. If it is in their mind is not giving the proper things, or if we feel that it is running fast, we will request them to have a test by our meter. They will charge the testing fees, etc. Therefore, the question arises, if we see the electricity bill components, there is a rental charges, electricity duty, and etc., etc. The court came to the conclusion all these are the part of transmission and distribution of electricity. You cannot subdivide it. Essence of this service is that keeping in mind the bundle service concept given under section 66D of the Finance Act. Thereafter, the same judgment, the High Court also analyzes the provision of the CGST Act also. Can it be taxed? Because the CGST Act also, electricity they never want to tax. And they said that distribution and transmission is not taxable. And in that context, the High Court has analyzed the definition given under, the CGST Act. The section 8, if we see in case of a composite and a mixed supply concept, both was analyzed by taking into account section 230 of the composite supply. The High Court came to the conclusion that the section 8 will be applicable by rejecting the revenue contention. Revenue was taking a stand that if electricity is exempted, therefore the section 8 will not apply. The High Court said no. Section 8 does not say so. Section 8 will apply in full force, whatever may be the activity. Therefore, if there is an exempted activity and it fall under the mixed supply, then the section 8 says the tax will be applicable at the rate which is the principal supply. Therefore, the principal supply in this case is the electricity, and on which the tax rate is nil. Therefore, no tax can be levied on the other activity, whatever may be the testing activity, laying down the cables, etc. And it was stated that so far as the circular issued by the Government of India, the 1st March 2018, is ultra virus to the Act itself. Therefore, the law has again been laid down. You essentially ask the another question to yourself. Had it been suppose the electricity is brought under the within the GST law, and electricity is taxed at the rate of, let's say, 30%. And in that case, you ask the same officer, he will not say you pay separate tax, taking element of rental charges, testing charges, labor charges. If suppose the tax rate on these elements are 5%, then they will say, no, it is a electricity supply, and essentially the principal supply, therefore the tax rate which is applicable to the principal supply shall be applicable. I have the n number of instances where the Government of India officers took a stand which is contrary to the law and only increase the litigations and burden on the taxpayers. And ultimately, because they know the officer, these kind of litigation are decided and take generally longer period of time. By the time half of the assessee agreed to pay the tax, that is the essentially their stand. Therefore, this judgment will help us to understand the entire law. In fact, another judgment once will come, the ocean freight case. I will discuss again the couple of example where we can understand what exactly we should take a stand in such cases when the officers ask us to pay the GST by taking out certain element of a one transaction, which essentially will be out of the tax net. Another two judgments, one is from the Gujarat High Court and Bombay High Court. Both are contrary to each other's. One is the JCB India Limited, delivered by the Bombay High Court, and one is the Philco Trade Center Private Limited versus Union of India by the Gujarat High Court. And if we see both the judgment, I personally feel we need not to go in detail of this judgment because of the simple reason. Because after this judgment, one amendment has also been carried out by the Finance Act 2020 in section 140. Because briefly speaking about this judgment, if we see the JCB judgment, the court stated, Bombay High Court said 143 4, where the time period is prescribed, They said it is nothing like that. The credit can never be defaced, and you cannot say that it is indefeasible. And if you have not taken that credit within the time prescribed under the section 140, you cannot be allowed to take it. And they rejected the contention that this section is ultra virus. But if we see the Gujarat High Court decision, Gujarat High Court specifically stated in the judgment, they said we don't agree with the stand taken by the Bombay High Court. Therefore, the Bombay High Court decision was clearly noted. And as all we know, the one High Court judgment has a persuasive value. It is not binding at all. But generally, once the central law is challenged, one High Court take, unless until they found it, absolutely absurd, take a view, similar view taken by the other High Court when the validity of any law is challenged. In this case, the Gujarat High Court take a contrary view by observing that we do not agree with the observation made by the Bombay High Court and stand adopted. And in this case, the High Court of the Gujarat has taken a stand. If we see the para 30, clearly stating that once you got a credit right, it becomes your vested right, and there is no time frame is prescribed under section 140. Therefore, the time frame is prescribed, any rule, etc., that may not be valid at all, and there is no reasonable condition is there. In essentially, the court said you are entitled to take a credit where the dealer is not even in the possession of invoice, etc., and still the credit was allowed. And by holding that the section 140(3)(6), where the 1 year period was prescribed, etc., is unconstitutional. But as I said in the beginning, we should not lose the sight that even though this judgment has been stayed by the Bombay Supreme Court, but we should not lose the sight that Finance Act 2020 has made an amendment with retrospective effect from 1st July 2017 under section 140, and added the word within the such time as may be prescribed. Therefore, the time limit, earlier stand was that since the section itself does not provide the time limit, whether the time limit can be prescribed, etc., or not, by the rule making authority, delegated authority, etc. However, I want to clarify, one of the issue, sometimes we misunderstood that if any judgment is delivered by the High Court and a stay is granted by the Supreme Court, we feel like that the granting of the stay means allowing that, the judgment is reversed. That is not the legal position. Therefore, the certain courts even take a stand that if the Supreme Court has stayed, therefore the officer also take a stand, and that we are entitled to recover this amount, etc. I have though today I am not presenting those cases here, but the law on this point is very clear. The certain High Court has said the granting of the stay by the Supreme Court does not, take away the underlying ratio, laid down by the High Court, unless that High Court judgment is reversed. Therefore, despite a stay is granted against the judgment of the High Court by the Supreme Court, that stay will not take away whatever the ratio is laid down. Therefore, the officer will be still bound by those judgments, even if the stay is granted. The stay only will operate to the extent that if any benefit is accrues, like the refund is to be granted, certain amount to be deposited, etc., to that extent, that judgment will not be operate, and it will not be given effect to. But so far as the ratio is there, otherwise what would happen? Suppose the Supreme Court granted the stay and it never decided for next 20 years. Should I pay the tax if I'm not entitled to pay the tax? Or if I'm entitled to take the benefit of credit, should I not take the credit merely because High Court granted a stay in one of the judgment delivered by the High Court? It is not a legal position. Sometime later we can specifically discuss this principle of law also, which would be very helpful to understand how we should take a stand in cases where the stay is granted. Therefore, to my mind, the Gujarat High Court has even laid down the law because of this amendment of Finance Act 2020 will come in the way. Ultimately, probably the department may succeed in these cases by saying that the law has already been amended. One thing I would like to say, when this government took over, the charge in year 2014, it was specifically said by the finance minister, we will not make a retrospective amendment. But we have seen even in this budget, retrospective amendment was made. In earlier also, that retrospective amendment has been made in the GST law. And those which are against the assessee, if a beneficial retrospective amendment is made, that is always welcome by the taxpayer. But the retrospective amendment has been made despite promise made by the government that we will not like to make the retrospective amendment. Now, the another judgment related to the electricity delivered by the Calcutta High Court is the Srijan Realty Private Limited. This judgment related to the service tax, but it will have the implication even under the GST law. This judgment, essentially held that if there is a supply of electricity by, a landlord to the tenant, that will be subject to service tax. The fundamental error in this judgment is that this judgment has proceeded only on the premise of the certain provision given in the Electricity Act 2003. And the High Court essentially came to the conclusion that if we give any other interpretation, then it will be contrary to the Electricity Act. Since the Electricity Act does not permit for the supply of electricity by the certain landlord, like suppose, for example, if you see there is a big mall is there, that is owned by the X person, and if the mall has the 20 shops, and mall has taken a electricity transformer from the discom, and they have given the sub-meter to the every tenant, the question was raised whether the shop owner is liable to pay service tax, or maybe now the GST, to the landlord or the mall owner, because the electricity supply was made to the tenant. The Honorable Calcutta High Court took a view that since the Electricity Act does not permit, because the mall owner is not a licensee under the Electricity Act, he is doing illegal supply of the electricity, therefore it will be treated as a service. The question, my dear friends, you raised to yourself, whether I am doing illegal act or legal act, that was not a question. Question is that what is the essence the electricity is. If electricity, the best judgment, if you want to find a Supreme Court judgment, that is the state of AP versus National Thermal Power Corporation Limited, reported in 2002, 5 SCC 203. This is a constitution bench judgment, which has clearly stated by, taking into account all provision of the Constitution of India, electricity is a goods, and the supply of electricity, which is called as a consumption of electricity instead of sale of electricity, is treated only as a goods, and the goods is subject to the nil rate of duty even under the CGST Act. Therefore, it cannot be treated as a service at all. Whether I am providing illegally or legally, that is not a question. Like under the Income Tax Act, whether you earn an income legally or illegally, all income are taxable. Therefore, the question is not that if I am not a licensee under the Electricity Act, therefore a supply of electricity will become a service. In fact, I could not, put it, before you today. Another advanced ruling authority has come very recently, probably from the Gujarat Advanced Ruling Authority, because I am doing some electricity related litigation under GST, where they are being asked to pay GST on the supply of electricity. Then in that case, just I would like to narrate a very interesting proposition came. Probably somewhere the Narmada Valley, somewhere the certain office has been let out to the GST department, and when the electricity was supplied to them, while letting out the office, they were charging certain GST from the GST department, but GST department took a stand that we are not liable to pay GST at all. Why? They said GST does not envisage to levy tax on supply of electricity, and whereas assessee stand was that because along with the rent, I am charging is though separately, you are liable to pay tax. Where the Advanced Ruling Authority has given a decision, GST department is not liable to pay GST on the supply of electricity along with the rent. But if you see the other jurisdiction, the stand is very contrary. The other jurisdiction, the state tax officer has taken a view that you are liable to pay GST on the supply of electricity. even though facts are very clear, it was supplied through submeters. And why the submeter has been supplied, thank you very much, GNFC Limited, AIR, this Gujarat Advanced Ruling Authority has been, referred one of my friend in the chat box. Therefore, what I would like to say, we should not disturb or we should not be, taking a view merely because one authority has said something or one officer has something else. We should form as an officer or as a professionals our view, because our view would be more significant, because day in day out we read the law. Officers has the biased view, because is in India what I understand that they have a target. A officer is treated as a successful officer if he is able to garner more revenue, even though ultimately Supreme Court may decide against the revenue only, because the data you collect, 80% case or 90% case, the revenue always lost in last 70 years. But still they have not manned their way. They only will paint the black paint either on the chartered accountant or on the assessee that sab chor hai. Even yesterday, even the day before yesterday, even Supreme Court said GST law, the manner in which it is implemented is not a good taste. The Parliament wanted to make is a very good law, but the law enforcing agency has given a different shape to it, and they are painting everybody with a black paint. It is not very good. Even though Supreme Court has reprimanded, I don't think so. Officers will man their way. Therefore, the electricity is a very, very important issue. Why? Now you see the separate concept. I'm extending this discussion because of this judgment also. You see I think notification number 11 is there, where the rate of tax has been given so far as GST is concerned. And you will find one entry under that, probably the entry 13 or so, and where the rate has been defined, and which give the impression that the supply of electricity will also be subject to tax there. Because if you see the goods notification where they have used the word energy is the nil rate of duty. Now the question arises whether electricity of energy is the two different concept. If you see the Punjab and Haryana High Court judgment related to the C form, where they have analyzed the GST law, they said that so far as electricity is concerned, it will not be. Yes, my dear friend, I have prepared a word PPT. I will supply it, and so that it become very easy to see in one go, and you can copy paste also. I will request, my dear friend, after this conference, I will supply it to them, and they can distribute to all one. What I would say here, we see this notification, this give a misnomer to certain person. And I always encourage in the last few years to the chartered accountant friends that, because as I have been introduced, as all you know, I am also chartered accountant, and I treat myself first as a chartered accountant. And I am happy to say that because of a chartered accountant, I feel I am more successful in my legal profession. If I would not have been a chartered accountant, my understanding and concept would have been totally different probably. Therefore, the taxation law, if you see, if you are a chartered accountant, you are better equipped to understand, because very rigorous exams we give, and we read time and again the same law many times, so we can understand this concept in a better way. What I would like to try to say, so far as electricity is concerned, we should not merely understand that one notification has been issued, a clarification has been issued, and the department feel that electricity is subject to tax, therefore we should start paying tax. This is not a right way of thinking. We should understand and form our own view. And I have reached to the conclusion that the electricity is a goods, which has been said by the Supreme Court, and that is a constitution bench judgment. Second thing, electricity, though has not been described as a electricity, it was described as a energy under the GST goods notification, which has a nil rate of duty. And if we read the concept of Electricity Act, the energy itself is electricity. Therefore, it will not be subject to the GST at all in one form or other way. And my personal view is that despite the Calcutta High Court judgment, which is totally erroneous in my view, because it has taken into account only the Electricity Act, it has gone on presumption that since you are not providing electricity as a licensee. Therefore, it will be nothing but a service. Electricity cannot be a service at all. Therefore, you are not liable to pay GST on the supply of electricity. Now we can, see the another judgment, Safari retreat judgment from the Odisha High Court. This judgment, though is in favor of the assessee, but I still feel this judgment, though challenge in the Supreme Court, may not be ultimately come in favor of the assessee in the manner in which it has been interpreted by the Odisha High Court. Though there may be another argument, argument may take place in the Supreme Court or maybe in another High Court, then we can have a better judgment. Essence of this judgment is that the High Court came to the conclusion that the section 17(5)(d) is not ultra vires, but still you are entitled for the credit which forbidden by section 15(d). Section 17, subsection 5, clause D of the CGST Act. The essential principle of law, which I understand from the various judgment of the Supreme Court, is that if any law is made by the Parliament, unless declared invalid by the competent court, it is held to be valid. And if therefore, if the High Court has came to the conclusion that the law section 17(5)(d) is valid, it is not ultra vires, and that section 17(5) is specifically debarred for taking the credit in certain cases, how it can allow the credit? The High Court has, to my mind, after quoting some of the Supreme Court decisions, etc., has very given a it's not fair to say cryptic view, but very absurd kind of interpretation, which I would like to read it couple of lines so that we can understand why I feel so. This High Court judgment, even though in favor of the assessee, does not match the standard of the interpretation which we are expecting from the High Court should have given. And therefore, let's see how the Supreme Court will interpret or give the finding on this judgment where it is under challenge. Let me read the para 19 of this judgment. What it says: therefore, the contention which has been raised by the learned counsel for the petitioner, keeping in mind the provision of section 16(1)(2), 16(1) and 16(2), where the restriction has been put forward by the legislature for claiming eligibility of input tax credit has been described in section 16(1), and the benefit of apportionment in subject to section 17(1) and 17(2), while considering the provision of section 17(5)(d). The narrow construction of the interpretation put forward by the department is frustrating the very objective of the Act, inasmuch as the petitioner in that case has to pay huge amount without any basis. So what the High Court came to the conclusion: if you have constructed a property and you are letting out that property, you essentially pay the GST on letting out for commercial purpose. And if you are not be allowed to take the credit, whatever the amount you have spent on the construction, if you will not be allowed to take the input tax credit, it will frustrate the very objective of the GST law. That kind of interpretation, to my mind, could have been valid had there been only a clarification issued by the department. But here the provision was under challenge. If the provision itself is contrary to the law and very objective of the GST law, the High Court should have declared is a ultra vires. But on the one hand, High Court said the provision is not ultra vires. Still, because of the objective of the GST law is there, therefore you should allow the credit, and ultimately credit was allowed in this case. Therefore, so far as if you want to take an optimistic view, you should always take a credit and let your case also be taken up to the logical conclusion, and then it can be challenged somewhere and somehow wherever is there. Now, very interesting decision, the Mittal versus Union of India, delivered by the Gujarat High Court on 23rd of January 2020. And this judgment, of course, I was associated with, and I want to update to you, this judgment has been challenged by the Union of India in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has not granted any stay, etc. But the Supreme Court has issued notice and yet to come up for final hearing in this matter, where we have already filed our objection to the petition filed by the Union of India. what essentially was said the High Court. Let's discuss one of the very essential concept in para 132 of this judgment was taken up, and I want to describe why this judgment will help us to understand the concept of GST. As I said, in the context of the electricity torrent judgment, let me read the para 132 of this judgment, and please listen carefully. I will read little slowly so that you can understand. GST is implemented by subsuming various indirect taxes. The difficulty which is being experienced today in proper implementation of the GST is because of the erroneous misconception of the law, or rather erroneous assumption on the part of the delegated legislation that service tax is an independent levy as it was prior to the GST, and it go vivisect the transaction of supply to levy more taxes on certain components, completely overlooking or forgetting the basic concept of composite supply introduced in the GST legislation and the very idea of levying GST. Therefore, what I am not reading further, what essentially the High Court said, the GST department or those who are the delegated, make the delegated legislation, issue notification, they feel still GST is an independent levy and they can vivisect it and they can levy through the delegated legislation the tax. Why it was challenged? Essentially, in one line, by issuing a notification, they put a tax on the ocean freight. Let's assume for a moment that notification is not there. Then the officer says there is no tax. Therefore, you pose a question to yourself, whether merely by issuing a notification can you levy a tax? My answer will be no. Tax is being levied by the act. Notification can be issued for the purpose of describing the rate of tax, but not to levy the tax. Therefore, the levy of tax is governed by the Section 9 of the CGST Act or Section 5 of the IGST Act. And that is the subsection 1 only. Therefore, if the subsection 1 has levied the tax for the supply of goods or services or both, therefore, in this case, when the person is importing the coal and that was treated as a supply under the IGST Act, in addition to the custom duty, IGST levy is also paid. Now the second IGST levy, they want to have to segregate the certain components out of this import by treating as a ocean freight and levy the tax. Whether that is justified in the law or not, that is essentially a question. Therefore, you will read the para 132 of this judgment, you will get more insight, which is essentially was my arguments before the Honorable Court. The service tax has now merged with the GST law. Therefore, you can't have an independently service tax in addition to the levy of IGST on the supply of goods itself. And that has been noted by the High Court in the finding part in para 132. I am not telling my arguments before the High Court. It is the finding of the High Court, and thereafter the High Court in para 252 and 255 came to the conclusion that the notification which was issued both to levy tax and to put this tax on the reverse charge basis are unconstitutional, and both entry was struck down in this case. Therefore, another example I wish to give, which essentially we have put it before the Honorable Supreme Court why this matter was challenged, that if we see the concept under section 230, and they have given even illustration also in that concept itself. And therefore, if there is a supply of any goods, let's say, for example, we buy today a shirt from a shopping mall, and while the shirt was being shown to you, you have tried maybe 2-3 shirts, and then he has packed it. Even in effect, he has asked one of his servants to put the packet in your car also. So can you say in addition to the supply of goods where already GST has been paid, there are certain element of service, and they will charge the service tax in addition to that, because he has displayed many shirt to you. He has allowed you to try that couple of shirt also. He has packed it, and after packing it, he has put it into your car also. Therefore, essentially the GST is not every element you have to segregate, and that's why the concept of mixed supplied etc. has been introduced. And where the example has been given, where there is a supply of goods and there is a packing, there is insurance etc. It will be all mixed supply, and as per section 8, it will be taxed at the rate of the principal supply only. Therefore, in the case of ocean freight, their whole argument has to be, if Supreme Court once analyzed, we will come to that conclusion, come to know the conclusion of the court only. But as far as the High Court has gone into detail of each and every element and saying that, and another aspects which I would like to discuss here, because it matter has been taken up to the Supreme Court, they want to say in this case one important part. This notification has been issued under subsection 3 of section 5. And now stand of the Union of India says that don't read under subsection 3, read it under subsection 4 of section 5. Then it will become a valid notification and reverse charge could be applicable. Without disclosing, there was a specific amendment made in subsection 5 of subsection 4 of section 5, and a separate notification has been issued under subsection 4 of section 5 of the IGST Act. Therefore, these two are different concepts. To my mind, charging provision has been given under subsection 1. So far as subsection 3 and subsection 4 is concerned, these are the machinery provision. Machinery provision is to collect the tax by issuing notification from a reverse charge basis from the recipient. It does not levy the tax itself. Therefore, we have to understand this concept carefully. And I always, propound, or to impress upon my junior in my office, the same thing I want to say to all my friends who are hearing me. Sometimes we read only the essence of the judgment. Essence of the judgment, of course, we all should know. Like in this case, the ocean freight levy was declared unconstitutional and notification. But if we detail a judgment in detail, we find and we can understand why this conclusion was drawn, what argument took place, and what the court has given its finding. And sometimes I find in some of the judgment, certain finding I can use it in the other, litigations also, or while building up my concept in the other litigations also. Therefore, if today, some people come for an opinion, you can form certain, opinion if you have read the judgment carefully. And to my surprise, after this judgment, certain query was raised to me that whether this judgment will be applicable in the other territory also, because this judgment is delivered by the Gujarat High Court. I said to everybody, why there is a doubt about it in your mind? If a favorable judgment comes, you have a doubt. If a negative judgment comes from any high court, the officer immediately will say, you are liable to do these things, you are liable to do these things, and we all accept it. Therefore, we have to be very careful. The Supreme Court has made a significant observation in the canon judgment as well as Kusum ignored judgments. They said when any parliamentary act is challenged or the notification therein, which has the all India applicability, if any judgment is delivered by any high court, it will have all India implications unless until different high court take a different view. Therefore, if one high court has taken a view and declared this notification ultra vires, it is not a ultra vires to one particular territory. For example, while we ask to extend the date, income tax return, etc., it is a one high court deliver a judgment like earlier delivered by the Punjab Haryana High Court. Why we feel happy? Why we don't feel that every high court should decide it? Therefore, the law is very clear. Only if we have a doubt, only because of that, we have not read the other judgments where the Supreme Court said it will have all India implications. Therefore, to my mind, we should be carefully reading these judgments which can help us. Now, another judgment which is close to my heart, I want to discuss a little bit in details. My dear friend, if my time become out, you please indicate in advance so that I can close, that time within 5 minutes, my discussion.
Yes, sir, we have another half an hour minimum, sir.
Okay, that is very good.
It can be extended by another 5-10 minutes.
Okay. Then another judgment I want to jump into the Argus Global Logistic Private Limited versus Union of India. This judgment is delivered by Delhi High Court, and Delhi High Court judgment is that the Rule 5A empower the officers that they can undertake the audit, even the post GST time. They can go for the audit under the service tax law. This judgment, though I was not a party to that, but before that I have filed. In fact, the 5 cases I have got the stay from the Delhi High Court only, and I also got the stay from Gujarat High Court, from Calcutta High Court, from Chhattisgarh High Court, from Karnataka High Court on the same very matter. In fact, while this case was argued, nothing essentially was brought to the notice of the High Court that Rule 5A2 has already been declared ultra virus by the same High Court coordinating bench. The High Court could not have taken a view. If you read the para 7 of this judgment, the High Court has recorded that no material argument was made to challenge the validity of the Rule 5A. Therefore, why this judgment is wrong in the law. First thing is that it is per imperium judgment, and why? Because the coordinating bench judgment of the same very High Court was not brought to the notice of the High Court that the Rule 5A2 related to the audit was already declared ultra virus. If it is already declared ultra virus, coordinating bench cannot take a different view at all, and maximum they could have referred it to the larger bench only. Therefore, there is a flaw in this judgment, and when the High Court has already declared the rule ultra virus. Second is that the same very High Court, and in fact, the couple of the cases, the respondent advocate was also the same, has already seized up the matter where the Rule 5A has already been challenged. They have given us the interim order, and interim order is still continuing till date in all those cases. And while those cases were pending, this case was filed and taken up for final hearing and decided on the same very day, the day very first hearing it was decided. So therefore, either you can say both the respondent and the petitioner advocate was not aware of the fact that, which is highly unlikely, this rule has already been struck down by the same High Court, or it was not deliberately brought into the notice of the High Court. That's why this judgment has come. Therefore, despite this judgment, we are continuing, getting interim order, and no audit is being conducted throughout the country so far as my client is concerned. I do not know how this judgment has come. Thereafter, another judgment has also come from Delhi High Court, and they have quoted the Argus Global Logistic only, and similar view was taken. But I am of the firm view, because as the High Court itself has recorded in para 7 of this judgment that no serious argument was made about the validity of Rule 5A, except one argument which was analyzed by the High Court. The rule making power is not there at all, and which has analyzed by the High Court. My view is that if we take into account the various factors, the Rule 5A is not valid at all. The first ground is that, as all you know, the mega cab already declared ultra virus. Despite that, it has been stayed by the Supreme Court. It does not make it is valid law. It only reflects that the Supreme Court want to analyze it. The second thing is that essentially Rule 5A is broader than Rule 5A2. This point is also, you should not lose the way. Earlier we challenged only Rule 5A2. Now we have challenged the Rule 5A itself. The Rule 5A has the two elements, Subrule 1 and Subrule 2. And Subrule 1 is different than the Subrule 2. Subrule 2 empower to conduct audit, where the Subrule 1 is empowering them to enter your premises. Therefore, if you see only one argument, then you will find substance in that. If you understand the Section 71 of the CGST Act, and as well as Section 67, the same argument I am telling you in the Finance Act. Section 71 of the GST law is saying access to the premises. The officer can access to your premises, and no limitation has been provided in section 71 of the CGST Act when they can access, on what basis they can access, for which period, nothing. Whereas section 67 says if they want to conduct a search in your premises, then at the officer, proper officer, not below the rank of the joint commissioner, first form an opinion, and on the basis of the opinion he find that the certain things take place, then only he can authorize someone to access your premises and conduct a search. This section 71 does not have such kind of embargo or safeguard. Similarly, rule 5A(1), if you see, when it says about the access to your premises, it has not laid down any kind of the safeguard at all. Therefore, rule itself cannot empower something which is contrary to the law. What I can recollect, the section 82 was there in the Finance Act, which empower them to conduct a search. Therefore, if a search is to be conducted and by accessing your premises, there are certain safeguard is made by the legislator. It is not an whims and fancies one can authorize for the search. Therefore, if the rule 5A is valid, 5A(1) is valid, then why they will conduct a search? Because for conducting a search, you need an authorization. And authorization can only be given when the certain parameter is recorded, certain documents they have in their possession. They would have analyzed those documents. On the basis of that, the commissioner or the joint commissioner come to a conclusion that there are reason to believe certain things took place. Then only he can authorize, like, you have secreted certain record, etc. Therefore, this rule is invalid. In any case, I will not go, much to elaborate upon is that, just to impress upon all my friends that merely because the judgment has come, you don't feel that the other judgment has been upset. Other judgment is still valid, and moreover, in the GST law, there are more other concept has come. Whether 5A(1) is valid or not, that will also be tested by the Honorable High Court, even Delhi High Court and other High Court. Now, the another interesting judgment I would like to discuss, the South Eastern Coalfield Limited, which is the seasted decision. Generally, I don't like to discuss, the tribunal decision, but somehow it has been, mentioned in the list, and I found this judgment is quite relevant to be discussed. It will help us to understand the GST concept also. But I would like to say, right from the very 2012, I formed the same view. I had given the opinion to many, public sector company and private sector company about the same, a similar view, which has now been upheld by the tribunal in this judgment also. The case of, this case is very simple to understand. Section 66E and capital E and then close E, which is called as a declared service, has a concept, the declared service concept, in which, they want to tax certain activity by saying that your tolerance of an act, etc., will be subject to tax. What the essentially tribunal came to the conclusion in this case, if any amount is charged is not taxable. Taxable is a consideration. And if you go by this judgment of the tribunal is basically relying upon two of the judgment which I was associated with in the Supreme Court. One is the judgment of the batch petition Bihana Builder, which I was representing in the 5 of that matter in that case also. And another is the Continental, judgment where I got the struck down the rule 5 of the valuation rules. Valuation rules was struck down. And essentially that is this judgment of the tribunal is based upon the Supreme Court 2 decision, where the concept of consideration has been analyzed, and vis-a-vis to the section 67. The Supreme Court came to the conclusion that to call it as any activity as a service, there has to be a consideration, and consideration has to be by the one person to the other person, and it has to be for providing any services. If there is no services provided, any amount is paid, it cannot be called as a consideration. In this case, there was certain penalty was levied, certain liquidated damage was claimed. In fact, it happened in many cases. Therefore, the tribunal came to the conclusion that it cannot be subject to the service tax at all. Therefore, the similar concept which they have introduced even in the GST law, we can take it. Because what I want to harp upon is that sometimes we misunderstood that the tax is on the, merely on the money transaction. Money transaction is not a tax. Tax is on the supply of goods or supply of services or both. Therefore, merely because some amount has been paid, if it is to be taxed, then the entire definition of the supply under section 7 become irrelevant. How it could be taxed it? Therefore, it cannot be taxed at all. I want to give the 2-3 example. One of the public sector company approaches to me long back, maybe around 8-9 years back. They said, when we want to recruit certain people in our company, we advertise and we ask the people to apply for the relevant post with a fee of rupees 200 by paying a demand draft, where the auditor, took an objection saying that this is subject to the service tax. Therefore, you have to pay service tax. In that context, they came to me and asking me to pay, to give an opinion. And second concept for the same company also came into consideration, a notice pay. When a company officers, leave the company without giving a 2 months notice, he was required to pay notice pay. Or if you dismiss any of your officers, you have to pay them the notice pay. The question arises whether that will be subject to service tax or not. If you understand this concept clearly, what essentially was the officer was asking, he is asked merely because money has been exchanged, you have to pay tax. Where the tax was not merely because the money was paid. Tax is essentially on, as of now, the supply of goods or supply of services, and that too for a consideration other than for related party, for a consideration, and it is for the furtherance of business or commerce. Therefore, each element we have to say whether it is for supply of goods or service or not. Secondly, whether there was a consideration or not, whether it was essentially a furtherance of business or commerce or not. These are all essential elements. If we are not fitting into that, then it will not be a supply. And if it is not a supply, then there is no question of levying tax at all. Therefore, to my mind, as tribunal has held, the notice pay will not be taxable, as the example I have given, or the application fees you charge from a candidate who apply in your company, it will not be taxable, because that is essentially not a service. Now, I want to further extend this discussion for 2-3 minutes. If you see the Schedule 3 of the GST law, taking account this decision of the tribunal, which you can quote and which you can take into account while deciding one factor. Schedule 3 is saying, as if there is a in the course of employment, if employee is providing service to the employer, that will not be taxable. Now the question arises vice versa. As we had seen in the past also, if an employee come to your office, you provide him a cup of tea. You provide a proper canteen, provide a lunch to him, either subsidized lunch or free of cost lunch. Can it be taxable? This question you have to raise to yourself, whether it is the part of employment or not. Whether employee has come for the purpose of availing the lunch in that company. Answer is no. And similar kind of finding, if you see the base of this finding has been taken. Therefore, whatever we want to decide, we have to take into account all factors. We can't shortcut the discussion. Sometimes what we happen, really speaking, if any issue similar type of arises in your mind, just don't meet the officer in the department and you think independently, you will definitely reach at the right conclusion. Because it is a human nature. Once we hear the view of the department, we try to ourselves reconcile with that view and tend to be, taking the similar view as of the department, because the department is going to take this view and he has to make a case against your client, and ultimately you have to fight it. if you take a similar view, your client will easily pay the tax, and probably he will not curse upon the chartered accountant or his consultant, advocate, etc. You have not given the correct view. But ultimately, if the other assessee will go to the court, he will win the case. Then probably your client will regret that why he has paid the tax, unless until he is a tax evader, for which he has to wait for the Sabka Vishwas scheme, etc., which in any case 5 to 10 years Government of India happily bring. And those who are evader of tax, they will get the 50% discount. And those who pay the tax, they have to suffer the whole tax with interest. Therefore, essence is that, and that's why I had taken a view while giving an opinion to the Institute of Chartered Accountant, why they are not liable to pay tax on the membership fees. But I want to take this concept to the different view. One of the judgment today I read, it is not before me, but why I will give this presentation to you, I will put it because somewhere I have noted down what is the education. And the question before the Gujarat High Court in that case was that whether the board who conduct an exam will come within the definition of the education which is out of the tax net. Why I'm discussing with you? Because I am discussing with all my chartered accountant friends. The Institute of Chartered Accountant is facing a litigation where the same DGCI department, they feel like that they are more, educated than anyone else. They said those the institute is conducting exam and collecting examination fees will be subjected to service tax. And the almost 200 crore rupees tax liability they have raised, including the membership fees, etc. So many elements. But the education, now the question arises, what is the concept of education? If they said the primary education is out, secondary education is out, whether the board which conduct an exam, whether the professional body which conduct an exam, whether that will be the part of exam, concept of education, because so far as the education they said is not taxable, but examination fees will be taxable. Whether that can sustain. Another view which the Institute of Chartered Accountant would like to have, from the Advanced Ruling Authority, whether the penalty which they collect from the chartered accountant, like their name is struck down, they want to restore the name, certain application fees, etc. Even photocopy fees which the institute take, like in the High Court we apply for the certified copy, they charge certain amount. Whether that will come in the definition of the services, etc., and whether it will be taxable or not, that is to be analyzed. If you take into account this southern eastern coalfield, which has been followed by the tribunal in number of other cases also, whether that will be amounting to a consideration, whether it is the part of a supply of goods or a services, or whether it is a statutory functions which the Institute of Chartered Accountant is doing, or whether it is the part of the education which is exempted and not taxable. This view to be formed, and my view is that it will not be taxable, and the concept which has been propounded by initially Delhi High Court in the intercontinental judgment, which was upheld by the Supreme Court. And I was fortunate enough to have that view, and I still can say, that was only and only my view in entire country, and no other person has challenged that rule, etc. What I want to say, self-praise is no recommendation. I don't want to praise myself. What I want to impress upon you that, despite in the rule, if you read in the valuation rule of 2006, it was clearly stated that if an architect go to Mumbai and if he raise one bill to his client, charging his professional fees and reimbursement of the airfare, hotel, etc., he has to charge the service tax on the entire billed amount, not only his professional fees, and saying that it is part and parcel of the consideration, which was struck down. That rule was struck down, that illustration was struck down by the Honorable High Court and upheld by the Supreme Court. Therefore, we have to take a view which is, we should not go by the superintendent view. In fact, I am sorry to say that in most of the cases, if you really have the experience in going to these department, most of the views are formed only by the superintendent. Commissioner, chief commissioner are for the name's sake. I was told, and I have experienced myself in many cases, Superintendent write the order, final order. Commissioner only put his signature or maybe 2-3 lines only. Whereas if you go to the High Court, Supreme Court, you go even to the lower court, district court, every case is being heard by the concerned judge only. Judge himself dictate, every order. And that's why we have the maximum litigation in this department because of the two reasons. One reason is that these officers are biased. They officers don't take their independent view. They are highly influenced with their subordinate officers who draft the every kind of so-called notice or the order, etc. And their views are formed. Now, probably the last one judgment, if we can discuss here, some of the judgment has left out. If the time permit, I will discuss that also. The Commissioner of Service Tax versus Rapco Home Finance Limited. It is the larger bench decision has come in 8th of June 2020. This judgment is one of the judgment I has argued before Calcutta High Court, the Magma Finco, which has taken into account, and this larger bench judgment has taken the same view as taken in the Magma Finco only. The foreclosure charges, whether taxable or not, once we take a loan from the finance company or from the bank, etc., and we want to pre-close that loan, sometimes because they will lose the interest, etc., because they will take some time to give the further loan, etc., they charge some amount as a penalty, which is called as a foreclosure charges. The question before the tribunal was that whether it will be taxable or not. So in this case also, the larger bench tribunal upheld the division bench order of taken in the Magma Finco, which is further upheld by the Calcutta High Court also, that foreclosure charges are nothing but a damage or a compensation, and it will not be taxable at all. To treat eventuality foreclosure as an optional performance is incorrect, and the contract cannot be understood to be providing an option to the parties to either to perform or not to perform and violate. In fact, what happened, section 66E and small e was taken as a big tool by the department. Wherever they are not able to tax anything, they want to tax everything in that category. And most of the cases, the department has lost those cases, and they have not succeeded in those matters. Therefore, the tribunal decision, to my mind, is right in this way. And in fact, that view has been taken long back also. It was the reference matter to a larger bench, which has also uphold the validity. Now, the two decision I want to discuss. Some of the decision I have left out, which was given in your list. Sorry, some other day I will take up. But the two of the decision at my own I want to discuss with you, which may be quite relevant to all of us. One is the Bombay High Court decision I come across. That Bombay High Court said, if a proceeding, the question was raised in that proceeding, one of the issue was raised in that proceeding under section 174(2), whether the fresh proceeding can be initiated or not. That is, sorry, the Gujarat High Court has taken a view in the same matter where the education they have analyzed. Gujarat High Court came to the conclusion that yes, 174(2), fresh proceeding can be initiated under the Finance Act 1994. That means the service tax law. I just have a little contrary view, contrary view to say the view which was, not expressed before the High Court. The fundamental question which has not been taken into account. I just want to, inform to all the audience. The 174(2) is a saving clause. Saving clause only can save something which is already in existence in the law. Saving clause does not empower a new power which was not there in the act which has already been repealed. Therefore, the saving clause cannot be read to empowering something. Saving clause only can save what is in existence. Therefore, whether you can have an inquiry, investigation, which officer or which rank can make an inquiry and investigation, you cannot find something in the saving clause, for which you have to read the Finance Act 1994. Suppose Finance Act 1994 is deficient and does not empower, then the saving clause you cannot take the plea. That is the first point I would like to make. Secondly, if you read that judgment carefully, section 174(2) they have quoted, particularly clause E they have quoted. It should be read as shall not. If you read that clause, because it starts 174(2), if you read the before the clause A, it says shall not, then clause A, B, C, D, E. Then they get shall not, affect the investigation, inquiry, audit, etc., etc. Shall not affect. If once a sentence start with a shall not, can you say it can initiate an inquiry, a fresh inquiry, or fresh investigation? Therefore, this point was not argued. This was not impressed upon the court that we have to read, because what the Supreme Court has said, the legislator has used each word carefully. We have to assign the meaning to the each word. We cannot put our thinking into the law made by the parliament. The parliament has not drafted 174(2) in a manner which says, nowhere you will read the 174(2) says the fresh investigation can be initiated. It says shall not affect the investigation. It means if the investigation was already pending, it can continue. But the question is that if there was no investigation was pending, can a fresh investigation can be initiated under a law which has been repealed? Therefore, these 2 points you have to analyze and read very carefully. Then you can reach, some conclusion whether, such kind of decision is can be taken up afresh in the court or not. To my mind, it can be taken up. The second judgment I want to say of the Bombay High Court, where I read in one of the judgment. In fact, I was traveling last few days, and I read in traveling, so therefore it is not readily the judgment name is before me. I just note it down in my mind, and I will put it before you, after the conference and in my presentation, where the question was raised, a summon was issued by the DCGI under the Finance Act 1994. And the court come to the conclusion that if we read section 14 of the Central Excise Act, which was applicable to the service tax, they said they have the power to issue summons. Now the essential question you should read into that, including the section 70 of the CGST Act. I'm sure you are quite familiar that every officer is very tempted to issue summons. Summons are being distributed like, they feel like that they have the power to issue summons, they can issue to anyone. In fact, if these officers become the judge in any of the district court, they will invite every Indian to come to the court. Whereas the power is not like that. Therefore, what I want to impress upon in 2-3 minutes, you just appreciate this concept, or maybe 5 minutes. Summon is a machinery provision. If you read the section 70 or section 14 of the Central Excise Act, what is called the machinery provision? Machinery means that is a procedural things. It is not a substantive power. What essentially you will find that every officer start investigating against a case against you means your client, by issuing a summon. And very first line they will write, I am investigating, or I am making an inquiry against you under section 70 of the CGST Act. Section 70 you read carefully. Section 70 does not empower to make an investigation or an inquiry. It says in any inquiry you can issue a summon. Therefore, you find a power of inquiry in the other provision of the law. And if that provision of the law has been exercised, and in thereafter you issue a summon, then it would be a perfect summon. Therefore, if the summon itself is an issue deeming it is empowering them to initiate an inquiry, that is invalid. Secondly, summon can only be issued by an officer who is competent to make an inquiry. If suppose the inquiry can be made by a commissioner, or a joint commissioner, or a deputy commissioner, whereas the summon 99% case issued by a superintendent rank officer, or the senior intelligence officer, who is the rank of the superintendent only. Therefore, we have to reconcile that view. Generally, I've analyzed all these, judgment for the last 50 years. I did not find, such kind of arguments has ever taken place in the court. I tried to take this argument in the NBCC case judgment, But the court did not analyze that, arguments and deliver judgments. And the Supreme Court did not interfere by saying that the inquiry is pending. We will see, some in another case, all these things. Therefore, essentially, these cases are pending. I am arguing in many high court on these grounds, and cases are still pending. You have to see. Therefore, the Bombay High Court said that you have the power to issue someone is a different thing. The question is that when this power can be exercised, by which rank of the officer this power can be exercised, that is essentially a question we should raise, and we may come to the different conclusion. With these words, I want to thanks to my, Bombay Chartered Accountants Society for giving it this opportunity. I hope so. I have justified, for discussing the many of the judgment. Though I essentially felt if we could have discussed only 4 or 5 judgment, that would have given more insight. But if I was little bit fast, to kindly excuse me. And if I will get another opportunity, those judgment I have left out, I will definitely discuss. But if something you are posing some question to me, I will be happy to discuss with all of you. Thank you so much.
Yes, Mandar, you would like to take some questions? Mandar?
Yes, sir, there are only a couple of questions that we will take. Interestingly, a lot of notices are being issued for mismatch of ITC. And if the other party has not paid, then there are certain restrictions which are imposed on and certain provisions in that regard, Rule 86A, are there in the statutes. What would be your views on those provisions under the law? Recently, an amendment has also been made in Section 16 in that regard.
Yes, those provisions has already been challenged in the high courts, are pending. But despite, suppose those provisions are valid, still we can form in view, because there is a one essential concept. If something which is adversely affecting the assessee, without giving an opportunity, you take away his right, that is not valid at all. I will quote the parallel provision, so probably the section 83 is there, where the attachment of the bank, provisions are there. If you see, there are various high court has delivered a number of judgment. There has to be certain reasonable, opportunity to be granted to the assessee, and they have to record the reason why the bank need to be attached, bank account needs to be attached. Therefore, if merely because of a mismatch, they want to do it, we have to challenge it. And to my mind, that is not valid. I can give the 1 or 2 example to it. First thing is that if mismatch is there, what control I have? I have no control. I can give my record only. Secondly, the couple of notice I have seen, they don't give the detail of any mismatch. They merely write it is a mismatch. That notice itself is a deficient and defective. They have to give the mismatch detail to us. Thirdly, in fact, they ask you to make a reconciliation. I have seen so many my clients, and I ask them not to give any detail to them at all. How, under which provision of the law, they can ask us to make this kind of reconciliation? That is not there. So, even in fact, section 70 summons they have issued to recently to one of my client in Bombay only, which I'm arguing his case. And they asked to make a reconciliation. Reconciliation is not required to be submitted. What they can ask is documents. And essentially, please, take note of this word. Creating a document is something different than a document you are asking from me. If an officer asks you to make a reconciliation, that means he is asking you to create a document for which you can refer one of my judgments at ebis.com, where the High Court of Delhi has denied this opportunity to the department. They said you can't ask to create a document.
Yes, sir, there is another issue. Many SSCs are getting the notices from state also and central also, especially in GST. So yes, would it be considered as a valid notice, or only the proper officer? How to reconcile in those aspects?
The first thing is that I would say, even the Supreme Court probably in this canon also has said, and there are many other judgments, is suppose the parallel authority has been provided to 2 or more officers. Those who exercise first the right, he will be the proper officer. It cannot be. Otherwise, it violates the fundamental principle. There is no power of review under the law. If suppose today you are my proper officers, you investigate me and you take a view. Yeah, I am discharging my service tax liability properly. Now the other of your friend, he is also proper officer under the central law. He issue me, he take a different view. That means there will never be a finality on the issue. Section 6, even if you read it, it also says if one officer, jurisdictional officer, and another I want to say, I have challenged in the Calcutta High Court, the jurisdiction has been assigned as per circular number 1 issued in 2017 by the GST Council. My jurisdiction, if is assigned to the central government, the question arises whether the state government can take a jurisdiction. My view is that they cannot. Therefore, the both cannot exercise this. You have to take it. Though I believe the couple of contrary decisions has come in from the High Court. Those decisions are distinguishable because the many argument has never taken place before the High Court.
Sir, one last question. Recently, some notices are being issued in cases where you have applied for export benefits, that is the refund with payment of tax, and you have also simultaneously taken the advance ruling, advance authorization benefits. Then you can't claim the both. So, do you have any thought on how to reconcile and
Yes,
how to?
in fact, I told you that I have challenged these proceedings before Calcutta High Court in case of Olam Agro. And what essentially the 2-3 feature you take into account, and those my friends are taking litigation, they can take benefit of this advice. First thing is that those proceeding was initiated by the DRAI. They are not the proper officer. Proper officer only the CGST officers only, which are the different officers. Secondly, the proceeding has to be initiated under section 73 or 74 only. What they are saying, you have taken both benefits. Whether I have taken both benefit or not, only the show cause notice they have to issue. And essentially, they cannot issue a show cause notice. Why? Because I have not taken, export benefit by concealing something. I have to apply that benefit. That what advance authorization exemption is already there in the law. The custom authority is not challenging that. They said it is proper. In fact, in my client, even the discharge certificate has also been issued. Therefore, how the officer will challenge their own certificate? It was issued by. Second thing is that if I have taken the refund benefit, that benefit is also granted by the officer only, not by myself. Therefore, section 73 and 74, if you read it, it says if you have taken an input tax credit wrongfully, then they have to issue a show cause notice. Can you tell me if in any of the case show cause notice was issued? To my knowledge, show cause notice was not issued. What they are saying, you can't take both the benefit. I think 9610 sub rule 10 of rule 96 is there. They are saying that rule is not saying you have to pay that. Are you getting my point? Therefore, the legal procedure is always there. And legal procedure, they fail to follow, they know it. What they have understood that if we will thread to 10, out of 10 in India, 8 people will pay. They said, hamara guzara chal jayega. And if you will not come to their pressure, they will not be able to initiate any inquiry. Like in Calcutta High Court, petition is pending. They said to DRI, you first pass an order, a written order within 4 weeks. Now, 12 weeks has expired, more than 12 weeks. Pass an order whether you have any jurisdiction. They leave off their hands because they have no jurisdiction at all. Therefore, my view is very clear. That rule is also illegal. Though now the section 16 has been amended in this budget only. And maybe because of that reason only. Therefore, the rule, and that rule, sub-rule 10, you see, 5 times it has been amended in last couple of years. 5 times.
Yes.
And 4 times even the language was not changed probably. They combined it A and B clause, then they segregate it. If you ask to yourself question why they are doing, essentially, I was not able to comprehend why this amendment, because I don't do a procedural act. When this litigation come, I went into the deep of all these things. I myself to find out why this rule was changed. And one of the lacuna was there, and the last rule that lacuna was, removed. But still, to my mind, they will not be able to recover it if you take the litigation in a right spirit and the very concrete legal grounds. And I would like to advise to those my friends, don't give your defense in advance to them. We have a bad habit. Without a initiation of a proceeding, we try to make a defense before them. That is not a correct practice in law. Don't reveal your defense to your enemies. That is the first principle.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. President, any thoughts? President, you are mute. You have to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much, Advocate sir, for threadbare analysis of all these important judgments with your bold views, which we always know you for your bold views and the certain important benchmarks which you give it to us. So thank you very much for your analysis and sharing your knowledge with all the members. And Mandar, before you propose very well deserved vote of thanks, can I ask Namrata to just come in and make an important announcement? I will request all the members to please wait for just 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you. Yes, Namrata.
I'm here to announce about the upcoming Youth RRC. I am sharing video now. Is the screen visible?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay. Okay, thank you. Youth RRC is from 16th to 18th April, as you saw, and the keynote address is by Gurudev Sri Ravi Shankar. I'll urge you all to share this information with your colleagues, peers, and friends and families. So it is a non-technical session for all young chartered accountants. Do join in, and it will be a lot of fun, and networking virtual games would be a long-lasting memory for all of you. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Namrata. Over to Mandar.
Yeah, thank you, Namrata. Friends, before coming to the pleasant task of offering a vote of thanks to Advocate Mittal sir, there are two small announcements. One is that we have a lecture meeting on like what we have today, lecture meeting on indirect tax provisions or indirect tax decisions. We also have a public lecture meeting on 15th of April on the direct tax decisions by none other than Mr. Hero Roy. It is also going to be a very interesting session, just like we have one today.
Mandar, it is on 14th April.
Sorry, 14th of April. And the second announcement is that we have already announced our dedicated 15th residential study course on the GST on virtual platform. Though the dates are 3rd June to 6th June 2021, that is Friday to Saturday. So it would be for 4 days. There will be 2 panel discussions, 2 group discussions, 2 paper presentations, and 1 paper presentation. And we have covered a very important and interesting topics in the entire program, including corporate restructuring, certain case studies on the substantive part of the law, certain case studies on the practical aspects of the law. So I urge all of you to please enroll for the same. If you enroll before 15th of April, then there is an early bird discount. If you enroll after that, then you have to pay a little bit more. So with these 2 announcements, I'll come back to the pleasant task. Friends, incidentally, today is the first day of the IPL. And for those who do not know, Mr. Mittal is also associated with IPL indirectly. He has won a very good case in the matter of Mr. Ganguly before Calcutta High Court, if I'm not wrong, in the IPL matter few years ago. his entire session reminded of me of the 2020 series. He has taken such important decisions in such a vehement manner that I'm sure that all of you will agree that this is a very high scoring session that we have today here in a very limited span that we gave to Mr. Mittal. So, sir, very thankful to you for this amazing session. We have already got the feedback that people have loved your session. We hope that in the time to come, you will be with us and you will deliver as many lectures as possible for the benefit of the all and for the society per se. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mandar.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. We can close the session now.
Yeah, thanks.